Hello and welcome back to AI Mavens, your podcast that focuses on practical AI solutions for your business. Dave, how is life?
Very good, Peter. And how about with you?
Pretty good. I wanted to apologize to our audience. We had a bit of a gap in our publishing schedule. I had a family emergency and had to go on a trip last minute to Europe for 2.5 weeks. So we're back. We're back and we intend to stay back. It's good to be back. Dave, we have a whole bunch of news today, and I want to maybe start off with something you've discovered. Maybe you can talk about it while I'm pulling it up on the screen.
Yeah, one of the big new conversation points, people are calling it kind of a second DeepSeek moment. DeepSeek was released and it got a lot of attention. This is getting some of that same type of attention. I'm not sure it's justified, but we'll have a look here and go through is a product called Manus, where there's a video here we can kind of go through and it'll give a little intro into what this is. This is stepping into what they're referring to as a generalized agentic tool. So this idea of an agent that'll go out and do multiple tasks for you, not just come back with one piece of information, but execute a series of steps in a more generalized view. This is what they are claiming that they've built.
Okay, let's have a look at the video for at least a couple of minutes.
Hi, I'm Pete from Manus AI. For the past year, we've been quietly building what we believe is the next evolution in AI. And today, we're launching an early preview of Manus, the first general AI agent. This isn't just another chatbot or workflow. It's a truly autonomous agent that bridges the gap between conception and execution. While other AI stops at generating ideas, Manus delivers results. We see it as the next paradigm of human-machine collaboration, and potentially a glimpse into AGI. Now let me show you Manus in action across 3 completely different tasks. Let's start with an easy one. In this example, we'll ask Manus to help screen resumes. I've just sent Manus a zip file containing 10 resume documents. Since each Manus session has its own computer, it can work like a human. First unzipping the file, then browsing through each resume page by page, and recording important information to documents. Manus works asynchronously in the cloud, which means you can close your laptop anytime, and Manus will notify you when everything is complete. Of course, you can also give Manus new instructions at any time. Here I've sent Manus 5 more resumes. After carefully reading all 15 resumes, Manus provides the ranking suggestions, along with candidate profiles and evaluation criteria as supporting materials. This is pretty good, but I prefer a spreadsheet. Let's have Manus create one. Manus has its own knowledge and memory, so it can teach Manus that the next time it handles a similar task, it will deliver a spreadsheet right away. In this example, we'll have Manus conduct some research. It needs to filter New York properties based on multiple criteria. For complex tasks, Manus first breaks them down and creates a to-do list. Manus begins by searching and carefully reading articles about the safest neighborhoods. Then Manus researches middle schools in New York. Next, Manus writes a Python program to calculate my budget. Based on my budget, Manus filters listings on real estate websites. Finally, combining all the information gathered, Manus writes a detailed report and compiles all the resources. In this example, we have Manus perform a correlation analysis between stocks. For professional data, Manus can access authoritative data sources through APIs. After validating the acquired data, Manus begins writing code for data analysis and visualization. For Manus, coding isn't necessarily the goal, but rather a universal tool for solving problems. It looks like Manus has completed the data analysis and visualization. But interactive data visualization is even cooler, so I asked Manus to create a website based on these data. With my permission, Manus deploys the finished website online and provides me with a shareable link. Let's see what Manus has created.
Dave, quite impressive, I would say, at least as a demo.
There's a couple things I love about this, and then a couple things that I have some questions about. So I really like the idea that it stitches things together, describes what it's doing. You can give it a complex task. It'll build itself a set of instructions and then execute on those. That it seems to be doing really well. So that's part of the things I love about it. Part of the things I'm questioning on is from my definition of AGI, is nowhere near artificial general intelligence.
Right.
It is still just scripting, automated. There's no thinking truly in that. It's not saying, what kind of a neighborhood do you want to live in? What is a good neighborhood? It's not doing any of that work. And then how do you trust it? How do you know that information around stocks, around neighborhoods, that it got from the right source? From your perspective, Peter, what's your initial reaction to something like this?
Yeah, I fully align with what you're saying. I think, I mean, it's those demos are often a little bit overwhelming. And by the way, what is it with? I mean, I get it. Attention span is short, but these way too fast speaking people. I don't want to assign it to age, but I think if they go one step further in 5 years from now, they will sound like a modem used to sound 25, 30 years ago. What's going on with that? I mean, nobody can follow this properly. Or is it just me being, borderline boomer?
I think it is probably, like, as I am, a boomer thing around. A lot of people turn their videos to 2x. So
Right.
that's just I'm curious if they're trying to align, or they sped up their audio to align with what people's
What I
expectations are
used to.
becoming.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyhow, back to this. Yeah, I mean, I think what I find a bit not maybe unique here is the approach of saying, okay, it's sort of a research tool that then can use code snippets or code sections to basically work with the acquired information or data through the research, and that combination is very interesting. Is that agentic? Not sure. The way I would define it, but it's definitely sort of takes multiple steps into account. And if, for instance, this demo we just saw automatically more or less creating a website out of some research information, I think that is impressive. And it shortcuts the path from discovery to analysis to presentation, right?
Agree. And it is a powerful tool, really impressive. Again, it's not a leap forward. It's kind of giving us some insight into what we could do next. We've got some really interesting use cases down lower on the page that you could look at. And I think in that, it is, again, another powerful tool. It's not thinking for itself. It's not inventing any of this stuff. Sure, it's building
Right.
itself a list of to-dos, but it's not generalized intelligence in this. But I think that seems like a silly claim to me. I
Yeah.
guess that's my criticism of it.
Yeah.
And again, all of this, how do you evaluate if it's getting good information sources? How do you evaluate if it's actually telling you the right information? All that stock criteria and data looks super impressive. How do you make a good fight? Would I trust that to make an investment decision? Heck no.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's very new, this release or this update on this new tool. So we're gonna evaluate, of course, how well it works for us and take a look at like we will shortly here after the news section in our deep dive on a couple of tools. So. So yeah, I'm curious to explore it and play with it and create a couple of outputs and see how much the automation really helps me and find out. So in one of the upcoming episodes, I'm sure we'll take a look at it. What it did elicit, though, it seems like, is a reaction from OpenAI releasing what they call tools to help businesses build AI agents. Again, very new. I think it's a day old as a news item. It was released on TechCrunch yesterday. Dave, how do you read this reaction? If it's a reaction or just a coincidence?
I'm not sure I want to be in Sam Altman's shoes these days. It seems like he's responding to a lot of different things,
Right.
which is kind of funny because this is literally like it's called the Responses API, which
Right.
I don't think that's a little bit tongue in cheek. But it's interesting where what they've done is they've taken their operator product and some of the APIs around that and made that available to developers. So they're trying to respond to the release of Manus. They are continually finding themselves with DeepSeek and other tools that are kind of releasing these new innovative ideas, trying to still remain relevant, essentially. Instead of being at the forefront of what's happening, which they are in certain areas, they're trying to hedge their bets and make sure that they're not irrelevant in certain ways. So my read of this news article is them saying, hey, Manus is really cool, we can do that too, which I don't think they can in the same way, but this
Right,
is their attempt around it. Where, yeah, if you're a developer, you could write codes and scripts using these responses API,
right.
but in that Manus tool that you just saw, you can just add in some information, makes it very generalized and accessible.
Mainstream
Peter,
user. It's aimed at the mainstream user, right?
exactly. So,
Right.
from your perspective, Peter, releasing an API versus releasing something like Manus, that doesn't feel like it's the same thing at all to me.
Yeah, and you do think that it is a reaction to Menace and not a coincidence?
Given that it came out a couple days later, and Manus in the news kind of chatter and cycle has had a lot of publicity around that this
Right,
came out yesterday, does
right.
feel like a reaction and a response
Yeah,
from my
yeah.
perspective.
And then I guess the next question would be: is this a repackaging of something else on OpenAI side, right? Like slap something on, give it a new name, and position it against Menace. I mean, I guess it comes down to the key question here is it looks to us and not and many other people, I think, in terms of the commentary that, like you said, OpenAI is playing this whack-a-mole game to trying to be all and end all to everything AI. And so any new tool that comes up, it's like we can do that too, right? And so is that the right strategy though for OpenAI, or would it be a better strategy for them to focus on core competency in some areas and be really, excellent, world leading in that area, hoping that they're on the right path? I guess this is it seems still like the strategy of spreading the seeds over many flower pots and see what blooms, rather than having found quote unquote product market fit, although they are a leading provider of AI to a lot of customers, consumers, and so on. What are your thoughts in terms of AI strategy here? Open AI strategy here.
What I read in it, that's why I say I wouldn't want to be in Sam Altman's shoes, because it seems like the strategy that they seem to be looking to is they're the brand of AI chatbot. When you think of searching, you don't say I'm going to go search something online. You Google it. They're trying to maintain that supremacy position of you chat GPT something. They're trying to verb themselves in this, and so saying they're relevant across all these areas. Other providers are niching into certain spots where they really fit. But OpenAI seems to still be trying to maintain that hegemony around we can do everything.
Right.
And so they're both trying to innovate and build new tools, and also trying to respond to anything new that emerges in the market, and be both things, which is just a lot of effort, a lot of work.
Right.
And so they seem to sort of be doing it from one perspective. Whether they're successful or not, hard to say. But I think they probably do have and are the most uh, user traffic and kind of popularity in this space.
Mhm.
And it probably does make sense to try and maintain that as long as possible.
Yeah, it puts the pressure on, right? Yeah, for sure. Speaking of which, they also had some released news not too long ago about a new extended model, which they call ChatGPT 4.5. And what's that all about? What's the benefit of 4.5 over 4.0?
Yeah. So one of the things you need to keep in mind is if you log into ChatGPT now, there's like about 7 or 8 different drop downs that you can choose from, and this is the newest one.
Right.
And so in this, there's a bunch of interesting, innovative features in this, uh, but it's not a reasoning model. So 4.0, which was their previous model,
Right.
is a reasoning model where it does some thinking, it comes back and clarifying questions, and this doesn't have that yet.
Okay.
One of the things they've called out is that ChatGPT 5, they've given a little bit of their roadmap and where they're going. So ChatGPT 5 is going to simplify a lot of the things where instead of having all the different drop downs of the different tools you choose, it'll just talk about, you'll just use ChatGPT 5 and it will figure things out for you. And it will use search when you ask a search question. It will use other tools. The core advantage of 4.5 and what they're talking about is they've spent a lot of time really humanizing it and making it
Mm-hmm.
more interesting, as they call out here. They've given it greater EQ, or emotional intelligence, around this.
Right.
Some of the tests I've seen with this that are really effective is asking it kind of emotionally intelligent questions that it needs to respond to. It does a lot better at some of those tools. It's slower, it's more expensive, it doesn't have reasoning. So there's a lot of things that it doesn't do right. and you need to figure out when to use it well to be most effective with it.
So it sounds to me like the makeup and lipstick that they put on is adding a lot of costs with not that much benefit. Is that a reading on it?
Yeah, like I think again, one of the challenges of all these different tools is understanding when do you use the right tool for your circumstance. In
Mhm.
this one, if you're marketing with it or doing writing with it, probably a really good tool for that context. One of the things that I saw someone do with it is say, hey, one of the prompts someone put into it is, hey, I run a software company. I've laid off half my team. Help me draft an email to reassure the remaining team that I've got and make sure they feel like everything is okay.
Right.
It did a really good job of that.
Hmm.
Like that kind of a problem, it can get right. But if you ask it a simple question like, you give it, tell me about the health benefits of these three types of bananas, and you say yellow bananas, plantains, and a papaya, it will hallucinate and tell you that a papaya is a type of banana and what the health benefits are. It doesn't understand it. The reasoning model, the old version 4.0, will say a papaya is not a banana.
Mm.
It'll do
Hmm.
its homework
Hmm.
on that.
Hmm.
So again, you really need to understand how you're using these tools, what's useful in them, and how to apply it well, and double check your answers. One of my favorite stats in their press release is that they've reduced hallucination from 61% of the time with 4.5 to now 37% of the time, which I agree is better. But
Hmm.
if instead of one out of every two, you can be sure that it's hallucinating, one out of every four is their improvement in that. You really have to be careful about how you use these tools.
Yeah. And I mean, I was, like I said, for family emergency reasons, I went on a trip and I was kind of out of the loop for a couple of weeks, and then came back and or dipped into it here and there a little bit, and I used ChatGPT and I looked at the models available, and I was confused which model I should choose, because I didn't have the time to look into what is 4.5 about, right? Like, why is that better or worse or different or specific to something? And it begs the question: are we going back to, like, the whole point about AI for me in the last 2 years was to simplify my interface with technology, which means to enable me to talk to technology and get back a multitude of cognitive or practical functions in order to simplify my life, to make my workflow more effective, or whatever it is, right? In the past, before that, what we've seen is technology was supposed to make us more effective, more efficient, and more powerful in terms of what we can accomplish. But the more technology we added, the more technology we had to maintain, right? You had a tablet plus a computer plus a cell phone. All of them are computers. Now I need to update all three of them and keep them in sync and this and that. And all of a sudden I have more work to do with keeping it all working than the benefit I may get from it, or not, depending on your situation. The promise that AI gave me was, I don't need all of this anymore, quote unquote, of course, in absolute terms, not reality. I can just talk to a computer and have it do the job for me, right? In terms of replacing Google with, for research purposes with something like ChatGPT, it does seem like we're making progress. But now it seems like we're coming back to the user has to maintain the technology and understand, what for what and which ingredient and at what moment for what. And a professional researcher can do that, but the average Joe that does this once in a while, once a week, to find out, a fact for a presentation, who can, does that make sense?
Yeah, you're exactly right on the moment where we are. And I think if you believe Sam Altman's roadmap and where we're going, ChatGPT 5 will get us much closer to that.
Right.
But that is precisely where we are in this moment, where 4.5 is still a research preview. So that
Right.
it's not quite kind of fully baked. And I think this is a bit of a response to keep innovating, keep throwing stuff out there that's new and interesting. One interesting stat, if you looked at the ChatGPT 4 versus the ChatGPT 4.5 from the API calls and the expense of those, if you put 1,000 queries together, it's something like these numbers are rough and not quite precise. But for 1,000 queries of the ChatGPT 4 Mini, it's about $2 to make that request. And if you level it up and try and use ChatGPT 4.5, which doesn't have reasoning, it's about $150. So the cost delta on that is almost ridiculous. Like, it's clearly not ready for prime time and market, and they're making it expensive so you don't use it in that way. They're trying to position it as that not quite ready for prime time yet. Clearly, just in the context of the cost for the API calls, or there's some additional cost to them they're trying to justify in this, or leveling up their prices. But in this, for someone who lives and breathes this, is a researcher, you can figure out how to get the best of these tools. But you're right. People go to Google because it's simple, it's fast, it gives you the best result right away. We're not there yet with these AI tools.
Right. Very interesting. Let's see if they can come around that corner and we continue on that path where it really becomes a true assistant, in a sense that it simplifies and makes us more effective without putting extra load on us. But
I think everybody sees where they want to get to. It's also a wildly complicated process and
exactly
problem to solve. Easy for us to describe, but I can't imagine how hard it is to get there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's we're complaining at the high level here for sure, and especially I'm wondering if what OpenAI is doing here with 4.5 is to test it on the consumer level through the ChatGPT interface before they consider how to bring it into the B2B API service, essentially, from a cost perspective, make it efficient, or it becomes a subcomponent of what ChatGPT 5 might be. So I think.
Yeah. I think it's a very interesting insight, and I think ChatGPT, the OpenAI team, really has the most data around what people are actually asking,
right?
How people are responding to that, and when do people feel like they've got a satisfactory answer. And this feels to me like sort of a product iteration research point.
Exactly.
Is making something more human, and what does more human feel like? Is emotionally intelligent language the right response to this? Is that trending the right way? So when they release a big new model like ChatGPT 5, which sort of pulls in your assumptions and just does the right thing for you, I think they have the most data to be able to get that question right, and the most kind of opportunity to figure that out. And so that's what I find most interesting about 4.5 is they're trying to like peek around the corner and see what that looks like. How do I read your intent, Peter, of what you mean by that question? That's interesting to me for sure.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, another, like, before we move on to the next point, our deep dive today, is it another one of those whack-a-mole hits on that's something, let's say, Anthropic?
Yeah, so definitely there's Anthropic as well as Gemini are releasing models. Grok is also releasing a huge new, like Grok 3 is out there and is taking a bit of a different tangent where it allows a lot of things that I don't agree with or is tricky.
Right.
But getting to that point where I think we're hitting this interesting ceiling where Grok 3, their big supercomputer down in Memphis, had way more compute than anyone else. They trained this model. And yeah, it kind of beats a couple of benchmarks, but they're all kind of plateauing at this point. And I think OpenAI can see that. And what they're noticing is you can't 10x the cluster and get 10x the results.
Right.
So you have to be more strategic and thoughtful about what you're going to get. Limitations, as we've always learned, are what allow you to kind of build something new and more interesting, even with the same compute power. And I think that they're trying to put some limitations on themselves in interesting ways, which I think will get us to that next level of advancement and development, which is interesting.
I think we didn't include this today, but I mentioned to you earlier that Derry Amadei was interviewed yesterday and was released on YouTube, and he actually mentioned something in this realm, which is he's the CEO of Anthropic, of course, and Anthropic has been known as a friendlier model, a little bit more polished in decorum, kind of, than most others. Not that ChatGPT had significant problems there, but what he said is that, up until about 6 months, maybe to a year ago, his major concern on the scaling laws flattening out was the data available. Like, essentially, we're eating up the data that is available, and it's all been used up, so to speak, or utilized what's available for training purposes. And on that vector of the two or the three scaling elements, compute, data, and algorithms, the data is sort of we're hitting a ceiling, right? And he said about 6 months ago, or sometime around a year to 6 months ago, he realized that the new reasoning models that are now out for a while have implemented a way that allows the model to learn from its own reasoning process. And therefore, the need for new data is greatly reduced in order to improve, the cognitive capability, let's say. So and he says it's leaning more on the process, of course, of what humans do, which is you ask yourself a leading question, what would I do if I go on a trip to South America? How do I optimize for a travel cost, let's say? And then you have some ideas, but the initial ideas are always kind of rough, sometimes wrong, and just out of the ether, so to speak, right? And then you start to dig into your own thinking process and let's look this up here. Let's find some sources for flight information, insurance, blah, blah, blah. And then work through that process. Which questions do I need to ask myself, essentially, in order to get to a good result? And that's what they do. And then there is a learning process through that iteration that then informs the model again dynamically. And I'm wondering if that falls back into the next training iteration, so that there is less data needed as raw input data rather than data coming from those interactions. And that's what he claims, is that he's much less concerned now about the ceiling presented by the limit of how much data is available. So I think that's one of the most interesting developments in this.
I agree. And I think there's two things happening in this where you're not going to find another internet. You're not going to find another training data source that we can magically loop in here.
Right.
So how do you get, you can create what's called synthetic data and do lots of different things, but just the interactions with humans, building that experience over time is going to create some really interesting things.
Right.
And then what I see ChatGPT doing with 4.5, not necessarily effectively, but starting to trend in this direction, is the same thing that happened with PC and Mac computers about 15, 20 years ago, where PCs used to kind of really measure, like, was the Pentium i4, whatever chip faster, what was its clock speed? And they talked about kind of how do you beat in that race of speed of processor. Then Macintosh came out and started advertising in a very different way. When they released the first iPod, it wasn't about how many gigabytes it had. They changed the language around that to 1,000 songs in your pocket. What was the experience like for the user? I know Johnny Ive, Sir Johnny Ive, I guess, works with OpenAI and has a connection there. And what I see them doing is moving to the experience of what it's like to talk to this device. Is it emotionally intelligent? Is it fun to talk to? Those are the kinds of things they're focusing on, and they're purposely not trying to beat those next benchmarks. I think we've kind of hit this point where if it beats a benchmark by 3%, am I going to switch what I'm doing?
Diminishing returns. Yeah.
There's diminishing returns.
Yeah.
But if it's more engaging to talk to, will I switch to that? Potentially. And they're shifting in this big trending from the amount of data, the amount of training data is sort of this commodity that has been well understood, needs to change a different way. And that user experience, what is it like to use, is where I see OpenAI shifting to address in a better way with 4.5 that I haven't seen others. And I hear Amadeo talking the same thing in this around what it's like. They figured that out a little bit before. And so OpenAI seems to be addressing both we're hitting that ceiling of what we can do. Grok is showing us that, and they're trying to approach this in a different way with different constraints.
Yeah,
you're right, Peter. I find that very interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's where I think that is a good segue as well to our deep dive topic for today, which is how well those tools do in the area of deep research. What is kind of branded as deep research services by different AI services providers and models. And it kind of kicked off while I was traveling. I was thinking about several topics and wanted to utilize AI in order to get a bit of a groundwork done in understanding certain things. And one of the questions that's going around right now, of course, for a while now, is what's the impact of AI tools, AI technologies on economies and the job markets for the foreseeable future, 3 to 5 years, maybe some interesting things also more current and short term. And I wanted to use AI in order to give me some ground data, essentially, like what's known at the moment and what are like credible sources that are speculating about this and making some projections so that, I can spin my head around that a little bit. And I started off with doing a search on Perplexity, because Perplexity has worked for me quite often as a quick introductory research tool, a search, essentially a better AI-driven search, right? And I did that, and I gave it a quick prompt. It wasn't anything really sophisticated. I just asked for what's the expectation on the impact of AI technologies on job markets, and a couple of more sentences, and then it came back with something that was rather disappointing. And I don't think that was necessarily Perplexity's fault, because I didn't ask it to go into a deep research process. I just did a simple search on Perplexity.
And you're saying that the response in terms of the quality of it was disappointing, not the actual answer it gave you.
The quality of the response, yes. So it was basically, what it did was it basically gave me these results that said, oh, the expectation is that millions and millions of jobs will be created in a short time period of 3 years or something, and the outlook is fantastic. It will fix all the world's problems, blah blah blah. And then I looked into the sources and found that the sources were really a joke. I mean, it was basically a blog of some think tank that was clearly paid to write that kind of content, and so that was a bit disappointing, and but I didn't pursue this any further at that moment, so it wasn't any comparison test. It was not Perplexity's problem. It was more like how I approached this with Perplexity by doing a simple search. Then I went on and did the same thing more recently with OpenAI, and I asked it to do a deep research. While I was preparing breakfast, I gave it a prompt, and the prompt looked like this. So I basically said, on my cell phone, I said, please create a detailed report on what the current understanding is on impact of AI tools and technologies on economies and specifically job markets for the next 3 years. It immediately came back with a set of questions from me to clarify. Are you looking for a global perspective, or should I focus on specific countries and regions? Do you want industry-specific analysis? Are you interested in both positive and negative impacts? Should I include policy regulation responses? And so on and so on. And I went back and just simply, again, on my cell phone, on the app, said, focus on USA, go across all industries, highlight the ones that will have most impact, positive and negative. Yes, positive and negative impacts should be considered and quantified or estimated. Yes, include policies in and their impacts, include government and industry insights, but focus on what is closest to the reality on the ground in the economy. Then it summarized what it's about to do and went into about a 6-minute and 29-second research process and came back with this result. Dave, any thoughts on what you found here?
Yeah, I think this is the question most relevant to all of us. When is AI going to take my job? As people kind of want to know. And so I think I think all of us have this in our head.
Right.
What I see in this is that it's got a really nice nuanced response. The answer is always, it depends, is the short two-word answer.
Right.
It's breaking that down to say, here or in healthcare, manufacturing, AI is going to have different impacts. There's going to be positive and negative impacts, and it frames this really well. So you can actually make a reasoned, thoughtful decision around this. How terrified should I be? If I work in financial services, is it different than if I work in healthcare? Because I think that the complexity is, if I collect numbers for building spreadsheets for a stockbroker, let's say, I should probably be pretty nervous about my job. But if I'm a nurse that checks the vitals of a patient and walks around the facility, I probably have a job for a long time in that context. Really, depending on what your job is, what the industry is, it's highly relevant. And I feel like this gives a pretty good setup. I also love that it's got those links in there to allow you to check the data. Did you kind of dig in and check the data on these pieces, Peter?
On some of them. And I did like that it did a much better job in finding, I hesitate to say better sources, but they did seem more credible sources that have more traffic and therefore more impact on their publishing. Of course, a lot of this, here's, for instance, McKinsey.com, generative AI and the future of work in America from McKinsey. So it did do a lot of, you could see it would actually, while it was doing the research process, it said which sources it's reading. And if a person would have done this over the course of 2 days, I would have said that that's a good selection. That's a good selection of sources, right? And so, Elliot Davis here, then BLS Gov. So there are AI Cadium. I don't know what that one is. The power of AI in manufacturing. So it did seem to be also trying to find specific resources for specific to answer specific impact on verticals. So I did like that much better. I mean, I haven't verified every single statement in fact, but reading through it, it all seemed really reasonable. Not just, and I like this quote that I heard recently, don't mistake eloquence with competence. So just because it writes well about the topic doesn't mean that the content of the topic is factually correct or competent, as it's known that hallucinations are always possible. However, I did like the result. You can see here it goes into the job market effects, in a similar way, scale of job displacements. It's clear that there will be displacements and in some areas, of course, more prevalent than in others. Job creation and transformations. By November 24, it says here were over 16,500 new AI-related jobs that were created, 59% increase since January 24. So that's a positive effect, and it goes into some of the negatives as well. Again, I really think this would be a great starting point if you wanted to, create a report, an article, or an input to some strategic decision-making process or whatever it is. Don't take it, of course, as gospel, or don't take it as a given that this is all exactly 100% correct. But if you do the reading part before you go into an analysis, it's a very good start to identify sources and to collect ideas on how to go about this, solving this problem. Here, for instance, it says roles most likely to be eliminated or diminished, roles that will be transformed and not lost, and then newly emerging roles. So it goes deeper than most things you've heard about in this discussion so far, at least in what I've been hearing from mostly people.
It's a great starting point. I think trust but verify is the principle in all of this. In the same way, if someone showed up in a really handsome person showed up in a well-dressed suit and gave you a presentation that sounded really convincing, we have a pretty good filter built into all of us around when they're telling the truth and when they're not.
Right.
And we can kind of dig in and learn a little bit more about that. One of the criticisms I've encountered and heard about some of those great resources and the links associated with them is I've seen a lot of people in videos I've watched in my own experience, you dig into the source where it's gone to get this information and you hit a paywall. Yep. If you're not a subscriber to all these different services, it might have insights that you can't even verify. That you can't go into and read for yourself and judge for yourself because it's accessing information behind the paywall. And I think as we get into more complex situations where a lot of OpenAI and other sources are getting deals where they're paying for content that you wouldn't normally get, which I think is the right direction to go, but it means verifying. Trusting but verifying becomes more complicated for us as humans, as non-paying subscribers to those services. So I agree, it's a great starting point. It gives you a lot of quick insights. But as you're getting into that deeper research and going further, I think it's going to pose some interesting problems for us to kind of verify that this information is correct.
Right. And I think, the thing is that in the meantime, the way I approach it is I always see these tools as a creative starting point of exploration rather than a conclusive answer to anything. And you actually mentioned this morning in our prep for this show, is that you found it interesting that I basically, while making breakfast and spreading butter on the toast, I was basically sending this prompt to OpenAI, to ChatGPT, because I knew the deep research would take a while, right? And I let it whittle away while I was having breakfast, and then I went to my computer and actually looked at the results more in depth, and started to try to understand, you know, what of this is valuable to me as an inspiration, as a first direction, and what is maybe rather critical to use as a, you know, as a conclusive answer.
I forget what the prompt was that I sent it, but it took 17 minutes to come back with deep research the other day. Like, it was a
Right.
long query, but this concept where, in the same way where if I have an idea and we're having a conversation and I just throw something into my phone, that it can then churn on for a while and bring me back way more detailed thinking that I'd probably have for myself.
Right.
Or if I'm curious about a topic and want to learn more, that aspect that I love of these tools, that's something that I think is really effective and useful. That I think is something that is emerging well and will be really interesting. But again, if I'm using it for my job, I'm using it to make a financial decision or around like what should I do for the rest of my career, I'd want to have a lot more ground truth data around that and think that through a little more carefully.
Right. Right. So then let's go to one more example before we close the show today that actually rounds this up quite nicely. So I did a similar thing on the current topic of tariffs that's going around quite wildly in terms of the political landscape. Of course, that has impact on business quite directly and society. So I have a family in Brazil, and I was wondering, what is the exposure of Brazil to this whole game of tariffs, let's say. And so the question I asked kind of nonchalantly to ChatGPT in a deep research session is, how much of Brazil's GDP is based on exports to the USA? You know, basically, how much is the exposure if the idea might be that, you know, that what's currently happening should also happen to Brazil. And the question came back to verify, are you looking for the most recent data on Brazil's exports to the USA as a percentage of GDP? Question mark. Also, do you need a historical comparison or just the latest figures? I just said yes.
Figure it out.
Great. So then it said, I'll find the most recent data on Brazil's exports to the US as a percentage of its GDP, along with any relevant historical comparisons. I'll let you know once I have the details. 5 minutes and 20 seconds later, I got this little report, which says Brazil's export to the US as a percentage of GDP. Latest figures, it's only 2% of the GDP, which surprised me, to be honest, especially with a large amount of food, agricultural, and other exports that tend to happen from Brazil. So valued at about 38.1 billion, and there is a link to WTITS World Bank. And then it says Brazil's total GDP in 2022 was approximately 1.92 trillion, which I could also verify here. Just to keep it short, but it gives a bit of a historical background and then a nice list of sources. Job well done. It was verifiable. I didn't check every figure, but I did check the big figures that mattered in what I wanted to be answered. And I don't know how long it would have taken me to Google all this and put it together in a page and a half or 2 pages as it is here. So what I learned out of this is, if there is reliable data published on something and there's maybe a good history of data available, these tools work almost flawlessly, maybe with the odd, adventure built in. But if you're looking into the future or on a topic where very little data is published, you might be on thin ice. And so that's how you have to treat it. In that case, you have to think about it as a creative tool to kind of riff with and to explore ideas rather than finding, ground truth answers. Versus if you're asking about information that is well published, but you just want to shortcut the time it takes to gather and assemble, I think these tools work really well, Dave.
It's a great perspective, because when you're looking to the GDP and historical data on Brazil, that feels really like crisp and good data because it has sources. If you're asking it to speculate on what's going to happen in the job market in the future, no one knows that. So it can sure imagine things and pull things together, and it's really interesting on that perspective. It's funny because as you describe this, I was on a trip in Slovenia and someone asked me what the GDP was of Slovenia. So I looked it up, I Googled it, and got back some information from their Wikipedia page. And I trusted that. It was enough information for me in that. And the information you got from this response is way more nuanced, is much more trustworthy to me than just looking at a Wikipedia page, because Wikipedia is pretty good. It's well verified, human verified. But those data sources that were in that document around Brazil, I find more trustworthy than just looking at one Wikipedia page. So it actually does a better job of that. But speculating on the future, I think that's where I'd want to really understand what sources it's looking at and how it's thinking about that.
Right. So if we want to conclude this whole topic on deep research, I guess it's not, it's horses for courses. It's not, It depends on the use case. It depends on the moment in which what model is released from whom. I think it's still a very dynamic field, of course, where we'll see some surprises. What's your expectation to happen next in this area?
One of the things I see is really interesting is a lot of researchers will use 3 or 4 different deep research tools, ask the same question, pull those responses back, and then evaluate and use that to inform their decisions. I think that's a really good tool to kind of deal with the moment we're in.
Right.
And if we look to the future, what's going to happen, my hope is that the ChatGPT 5.0 solution of we can ask any question and it will figure out what kind of a response we get, and we can trust that better.
Right.
And it knows enough to ask us clarifying questions to get us the right answer. That's where I hope we get to one day. So at the beginning of our episode, where you expected AI just to solve these problems, to make our lives easier, we're not there yet, but I see that possible future in somewhere down the road.
Yeah. And I think if you look at the threat side of things, it's not, it's like, repeating kind of broken record, but the threat to me is not in will it completely replace you in your job or humans in the workplace or whatever. For now, I don't know what the 10 to 50 year future will bring, but the threat to me is not understanding the dynamics. If you save 10% of your workday across a workforce of millions of people, it will have an impact, right? If it's 15%, it will have more impact. And these figures, I think, are not unrealistic. So I think that's where, the world has to look out and understand the dynamics. No business can afford not to take advantage of efficiencies that lay to their feet, essentially. And so I think that's where this whole thing is becoming more and more interesting. So let's see what happens next. I wonder if Google will, with Gemini and their deep research, they were in the news as, oh my God, this is better than anything else, but that quieted down quite quickly, right? So
there's so much news.
Yeah.
There's so much happening right now, both in the world spectrum as well as innovation around this. To get marginally better, I don't think is useful anymore. And to get better to the point where it's worth what is the switching cost?
Right.
The standard product thinking is it has to be like 50 to 80% better than the tool you're using to go through the pain of like even just ChatGPT to Gemini. Which tool do I use? Which app is on my phone? To download
just a cognitive load
days,
of making that decision, right? Yeah.
Exactly, is something. But it's interesting what you say around kind of the incremental gains. Dr. Rich Sutton, I was sitting in one of his lectures, and he said that he was not worried about AGI and taking over things a couple of years ago. And I was sitting there, and I was like, I guess I can trust this guy. But as I learn more about what these tools actually do, I'm coming around to his way of thinking. But at the same time, if I look at tools like if I was still going down, I've got 10 dictionaries downstairs. And if every time I needed to verify the spelling of a word, I was going down to get one of those dictionaries, check the spelling of the word and that I was using it correctly, that'd be pretty inefficient. And I probably wouldn't...
Quaint would be the term, I think.
The idea that I'd still go to the dictionary, like would you even trust that dictionary was the most recent accurate version of it?
Yeah.
Word processors do that for us now. They check our spelling, they check our grammar. That is an assumed automation and speed up of how we use technology. That's comfortable for everybody.
Right.
These new tools are uncomfortable. They're new. They're innovative. And when we can integrate them to the point where, like a word processor, we generate text and kind of tweak it and off it goes, I think that's going to be a power tool for a lot of people that will allow them to do a lot more. And how we incorporate these tools into our workday, we're still figuring out. But like you say, the people who can figure that out faster and better are going to be the ones that are most successful in this new emerging whatever's happening next.
Yeah, fantastic. For my friends in Germany, I quote the old saying that we joke for about 15 to 20 years. Every morning a lion wakes up and is chasing the gazelle. Now, do you want to be the slowest gazelle? So that was episode number 7, Dave. I think I liked it. It's back from Europe. If you made it in the audience to this point, please like and subscribe. You've earned it, and maybe we've earned it too. Your like and your subscribe and your thumbs up and the bell button. And we'll see you next week with episode 8. Hopefully, I think we're set for that. And Dave, great fun talking to you. Looking forward to the next one.
You as well. Episode 7, back from Europe. I like it. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.